This meeting is called to order. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the September 6th meeting of the Skokie Plan Commission. First order of business is approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Commissioner Berman, Commissioner Luxpati, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Our case tonight is case 2018-24P, zoning chapter amendment, microbreweries, micro distilleries, and micro wineries. And this is being presented by Steve Marciani.
Okay, so I'd like to enter the report into the record as presented.
Yes, so granted.
So this is, I'm just going to repeat some of this, even though there's no audience,
Just
because we're
give us
being
a
recorded.
overview.
So this ordinance basically adds small-scale brewing, distilling, venting of alcoholic beverages in the same districts where a bar would be allowed, as long as it has a tap room or a restaurant that serves the beverage being produced. And that's because we don't want just pure production. The production has to be for the sake of selling it for consumption.
Any consumption on premises?
On premises, yes. Adding general provisions for those particular uses, adding bars and microbreweries, et cetera, to the OR district. And in that one, we do have some retail uses that are allowed in that district to be supportive of the office uses that are there. They always have a restriction that they can't be in their own building. They have to be within a building with other permitted uses, so that you could have the restaurant in the hotel, but you can't have a restaurant building because that's very valuable land, and we don't want that being used for a bunch of small buildings. So this would have to be embedded. If it was there, it would have to be embedded into a larger building with other permitted uses. Adding tap rooms as a special use in the M districts, because food and beverages are already allowed in those districts, food and beverage productions. For production, for clarity, we have put both breweries, the brewery uses, and alcoholic beverage production just for clarity. It isn't necessarily necessary, but that's the changes that are happening in the manufacturing wholesale trade section regarding alcoholic beverage production. Just to be clear, it already is allowed. We're just separating it out so that if someone wants to do that, they can actually see it.
That was one question I had. So we do allow alcoholic beverage production in the village in a manufacturing district.
Right, just like
It isn't any other manufacturer.
Yeah, it's just food and beverage manufacturing, so it's the broad category is a permitted use, but that's the rationale for the changes in the wholesale manufacturing trade regarding alcoholic beverages. And because I added a group, then I have to put all other ones in there also. And even though they're the same districts, again, it was felt by the staff committee that was working on this that if somebody was looking to do this, that they'd want to see the line in there specifically.
Okay. Now, Steve, the word micro breweries and micro distilleries and micro wineries, I believe there are they're limited to a certain number of bottles they can produce a year or barrels they can produce a year.
We're using gallons because each.
Or gallons?
Yeah, and we don't want this to be a production facility because in the commercial and mixed use districts, we're going to end up with trucks and all kinds of stuff. So they can produce small scale, that's fine. And in any of those districts, anyway, everything's cumulative. So like if restaurants are allowed and you have a restaurant and you have a clothing store and they happen to be in the same building, as long as they're both permitted, then they're both okay. So it's a cumulative effect. But we don't want full scale brewer on Oakton Street taking up a block without any retail component to it.
Yeah, it's 50,000 gallons based on state law.
Yes, okay. Commissioner Quinn?
I think the question was answered. I think microbreweries are around 15,000. This would be up to.
Yeah,
50,000?
I know there's a finite number. Then after that, they become something else.
Right.
Okay.
And you asked if it was for on-site consumption, but a lot of tap rooms do sell for takeout. So I don't think we prohibit that. It would depend on what the liquor license states. So, but it's not a restriction based on the zoning.
So I did. So if you're allowed to, if liquor store is permitted, then liquor sales like that would be permitted. If liquor store is a special use, then they have to get a special use to sell off-site. So if the restaurant is a special use, they have to get a special use for the restaurant. So that basically it's mirroring what the bar rules are. And then if they want to sell packaged liquor, as long as it's allowed in that district, and if it's permitted or special, they'd have to get a special use for that in addition. That's the same we do for all uses. Yeah.
Except in the industrial district where if you manufacture on site, you can sell your product
Right, with a special use
with
permit.
a special use permit.
My question is, who's gonna monitor this? Who's gonna come over and measure how many bottles or gallons or barrels that they produce in the year? How are you gonna monitor that?
Well, there's a liquor license amendment that was passed several years ago about brew pubs, and it set that amount. So basically, it would be the Liquor Control Commissioner who would be in charge of it. However, we also are going to put in licensing for the tap rooms and the brew pubs as a separate category, just like restaurants. So they'll be inspected just like restaurants and taverns and packaged liquor stores.
Well, let's say, to monitor their production, would we be able to look at their sales records as far as how many they sell and what's in the inventory? I mean, who's to say they go over to 15,000 and produce 16,000?
50,000.
I would-
50,
What
yeah,
if-
yeah.
Let me suggest that I know that it has to be reported to the state. I don't know if we, the village, have access to those state records, but I know that the state receives a report each month from each brewery as to how much is being manufactured.
Yeah, are we, do
Do
we
we-
have access to those files or records?
I'm sure we could. I mean, I think the real test would be if we get complaints from the neighbors. I mean, when
Well,
there's large beer trucks coming in and out all the time. you
If
know.
they have the same type of state licensure that we would be giving for the CO, if they go over on the state licensure and that matches ours, then clearly they're going to be in violation of the state.
I'm just worried about an extra burden on the village as far as monitoring.
Paul,
Yes, Commissioner Quaid.
I'm thinking since we have some neighbors that have brew pubs, they've probably figured it out, and we could probably learn from that.
I can
We-
ask.
We did a survey and the regulations are very similar, so I'm sure the regulatory.
Not just the
problems are
regulations,
about the
but the monitoring.
same.
Yeah,
Yeah, and seeing how we have none, and,
right.
and we hope to attract a few. I don't think it's an issue yet, so,
Okay.
Paul?
I had a question
Yeah.
to make sure that merchandise was being allowed, because part of a tap room and a brew pub operation is the selling of merch. We have no disallowance for other sales at that tap room other than food, correct? So if they were selling T-shirts and keychains, that is a permitted use in a tap room? Or if it's not, I think we have to make sure that we have that as a permitted use.
At this time, with the tap room, to be consistent with all the other retail sales in an industrial district, you can sell what you produce, and that's it.
So I then think, knowing this business as I do, that it's essential that we somehow make it, if we want to make ourselves welcoming to tap rooms, that we allow at that tap room the sale of things not necessarily produced by, but licensed to that tap room. That would not be the sale of Budweiser merchandise, but it has to be the sale of that tap room's merchandise. It's an essential part of their business.
So that restriction would only take place in the industrial districts. It would not be in most of the places where these are going to be allowed, which is the microbreweries. So this would only be at a full-scale brewery in the industrial district, or any kind of brewery in the industrial district. Otherwhere else, retail sales is permitted in those
Once
zones.
once you're in a retail district, you can sell retail,
Yeah,
of course.
it's just the industrial. The reason why I'm a little hesitant about that is because that opens, if we do allow them to do that, it's going, since we restrict everybody else who wants to do this from doing that, because we want to make sure that our industrial districts are primarily for production of stuff and industrial, because we don't want to run our other industrial users out of town because of the district changing. So my recommendation would be to keep it as it is for now, and if we run into that, the way that most of our industrial districts are set up, I think is going to be very difficult to do something like this in industrial district, because the way the parking is very difficult with tandem. Like, we're not going to allow a retail area where people are tandem parking, because we're going to run into problems. So there will be a very small number of places in the industrial zones in general where these might go. And I would like to say, well, if we get to that, we can amend. That would be my recommendation for right now.
Okay.
Should also, just
go ahead.
to clarify, state law changed and said that these tap rooms and brew pubs can sell other products than what they created. So, if you want to buy a Miller at a place or a Coors, they could sell it even though they're producing their own product.
But our definition, though, is limiting it to just what they produce so that it's consistent at this time. We would have to then, even though the state license might let them do that
Well, that would be in the industrial district.
in the industrial districts.
In the retail district,
Retail and mixed use. If
Then-
you're allowed to sell a shirt, you could sell a shirt there.
and likewise, if you're allowed to sell other beer, once you have a liquor license
Then
and
you're
you're
a bar.
selling yours, you can also sell other.
Correct, because the microbreweries will be allowed in every district the same as a bar. So we're mirroring it with the bar. So in the commercial and mixed use districts, what we're adding is not the consumption, it's the production. And in the manufacturing districts, we're adding the consumption, not
To a
the-
limited degree.
to a limited degree, not the food, because then I'm going to open it up to restaurants and other things. So that's where we are.
Okay, Commissioner Quinn?
I was looking at some of the language in the amendment. One, curious if it was borrowed language. And then secondly, it seems a little fuzzy to me. There's phrases like consumption, there's also phrases like tastings and samplings. And I just want to make sure that we're clear about, what we're willing to allow.
So
The samplings and tastings kind of remind me of wine tastings, which are operate entirely differently than sitting down and having a pint of beer.
that's a bar. And I don't, at this time. I
So
don't
is
think
this someone that can come in and just have a flight, a sampling, but not have a glass of beer? Because other food pubs would not operate that way, at least in their
Right,
neighbors.
so that would only apply to the tap room, and that the only place where it would be an issue is in the industrial zones. I don't, we're not willing at this point to say that we want something, because if I allow that, then I can't keep a bar, any kind of bar, because basically now that's a bar. And then we'd have to, we would open ourselves up to equal protection. My opinion is that we would open ourselves up to an equal protection challenge to say, well, you allow them to sit down and drink as much as they want. Why won't you allow me to put my bar in there? Because really what the retail rule actually says is that what you make, you can sell, not what you make, you can use. So you can, if you make mufflers, you can sell mufflers, but that doesn't mean you can install the muffler. That would be a different use, right? That's auto repair. So we're acknowledging the fact that by adding the taproom use, which is why we had to add it as opposed to the other retail sales, because the retail sales special use in industrial district, we allow you to buy the beer, just like at the candy factory, there's a candy shop, that's to buy it. Anyway, that's our broader rationale at this time.
Yeah, that may need to rethink that.
If we had, again, it's only in the industrial zones, and as a practical matter, I really don't think there are very many locations in an industrial zone that isn't adjacent to a commercial area, which could change into some, whatever. We have another rule about industrial that's next to commercial or a business district, that they're allowed to do certain things also as a industrial plan development. Is that what the rule is? Or commercial plan development, industrial zones? We have a different thing to cover.
That was the TUI example adjacent to Wendy's near the car wash and the Walmart.
That was an actual rezoning, but there was another thing that if a retail wanted to open up next to a business zone, there's a way to do that without rezoning under certain circumstances. So, and we always have the example on TUI with the health club, where even though we rezoned it to be, we had the back of it is allowed to have certain M uses as a plan development. But most of these, I suspect, are going to be in our business and our mixed-use districts, unless they're going to do a full-scale production beer or wine production facility.
So, one question then about that. If we were lucky enough to attract a larger producer that did want to go into our industrial area and do a full-scale production facility that is larger than 50,000 gallons a year, that then is currently permitted, putting aside the issue of tap room.
Yep.
And then if that facility came and said they did also want to have a tap room connected to it, that is where the limitations come in as to what type of tap room. Even though they're a large facility and we're welcoming them, we currently will not want them to sell other people's product other than their own.
Right now, we're restricting it to that, even though there's a state law amendment regulation did happen. But if the purpose of a tasting is to then buy the product. So it's kind of like trying a shirt on before you buy the shirt, if you were a shirt producer, so having a changing room. So this would allow for the purchase, which is consistent with all the other I sell what I produce things. It's different than sitting down and with a group of friends and everybody's showing up and.
My thinking actually is, I'm just thinking of Taffy Apple, a large facility in Niles that is just producing, distributing, and has a very large retail store connected to that. Again, I don't know what Niles did, but I know that it's advantageous to one and all, to the Yaffe Tapple people and to the Village of Niles to have this production and sales facility. At that sales facility, they sell more than Taffy Apple products because they got all these customers, they might as well sell them things.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with the zoning on it,
So-
there's specific zoning rules, but this is in the context of the way that we set up our.
But if we were lucky enough to get all that, then they could come back in to ask for special use.
Well, we can look at that and make determinations, but just understand that that would be definitely a change to where we have been historically with all the industrial zones.
Okay, got it.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you, Steve.
Oh, one last thing.
Yes,
We're making all these parking determinations. The parking regulations on these for the other towns are all over the place. There's one particular microbrewery that wants to come in and their ask for parking demand is very different than any of the other ones that it wouldn't have fit into any of the categories. So we're making the parking for the microbreweries and microdistilleries regardless, and the tap rooms, and the brew pub portion determined by the plan commission when there is not a flat parking requirement. So in downtown, if they would follow the downtown parking rules, but otherwise, it would be, or at the mall, they have a flat parking requirement, but otherwise we'd have to do a parking determination because in my small n, the number of that we looked at, the demand on parking is really all over the place, from a few people to today we heard 40 people working at the facility. That's very different than other uses that we have in town. So we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis.
okay.
So that is then how you are writing this, is that tap room, with all of the other rules that we're making, if they are outside of the standard retail zones, then it's a case-by-case determination of parking.
If they're outside of the places where there's a flat parking requirement, which would be the CX district, downtown, and the mall, I think those are the only two places we have flat parking requirements. Both the malls, the B4, yeah.
Then in any case, wherever they are other than those two places, then they have to come to us.
Just for the park, if it's permitted, they just have to come for the parking determination. You guys make the determination and they're done. Then we roll with that and they go in for permit.
Are you sure that's correct? Just 1 second. It says microbrewery, microdistilleries, and micro wineries, off-street parking requirements for the production area shall be
production, right.
determined by the plan commission. So whatever the production area is on all of them, it's determined by the plan commission.
But above that, the brew pub part, because now we had to add a brew pub, remember, Pete?
Yeah.
That's also determined by the plan commission. So again, there's a lot of redundancy in here.
So the concern was that the actual production part may really not require much parking. So that could reduce it, which would make it more, make it easier for these to move into a district where they could be established.
Right, they need a lot of square footage for the production, but not necessarily a lot of employment.
Right.
So because they don't have a lot of labor, they don't need a lot of parking for that, but then we can make trades on a case-by-case
Right.
basis
Sure.
for the retail need.
Right, and the number that I threw out of the 40, but based off the square footage that's, or 50, or whatever, it's high. 40 employees working in that size that they were suggesting would be far exceed any requirement that we had regardless for production or for the sit-down area. So we just have to kind of, anyway, we're not giving you, we don't want to put a standard in, that's the point. So right now, until we get a few of these under our belts, if you want to come back and amend and put a standard in, if they always turned out to be the same, like we did with the daycare centers for children, over time, we just figured that, was it 1 per 500 was a good number, and that's what we ended up changing it. Now they don't have to get the parking determination.
Okay. Any other further questions? Anything else you need to offer? Okay. Open for a motion in case.
One more question. One more. The signage, was there any, I know we're not the appearance commission, but was there any discussion of signage or,
They have to
again,
follow the same sign code as everybody else.
and is the manufacturing district sign code such that it would not lend itself well to a tap room?
Actually, the large district, which this would be, you know, a large site, is actually more liberal than for regular commercial areas.
So they could, in a manufacturing district, therefore put up a retail-type sign?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
One sign per street frontage, you know, they might have one facing a parking lot where.
Illuminated, whatever they want.
Not more than 25% of the window area, just like everybody else.
That's fine. I just didn't want
Yeah.
them to be restricted in the manufacturing. Okay.
Okay. Now I'm ready for a motion. Commissioner Laspardi? Motion approved. Thank you. A second? Second. Commissioner Berman, thank you. Call for the vote. Commissioner Mitchell is absent. Commissioner Quain?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Scott Berman?
Aye.
Commissioner Velazquez?
Aye.
Commissioner Paradise?
Aye.
Commissioner Laspardi? Aye. Commissioner Jeff Berman is absent. Commissioner Matei is absent, and I will vote aye. Motion is approved. Or motion goes to the board with the commission's approval. Anything else before the board? Not seeing any, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for attendance.